Today's episode is not only about sustainability and climate champions and how to live out on your gap year, all of the values that go along with that. It's also about having confidence as a young person to connect with different resources in your community that are a really, really powerful way to make the most of your gap year. So I'm so excited for you to listen to Kayne and his story about how he got involved in climate action. And I hope it inspires you to find your passion and then find the people that can help share those same values and help you to move forward to make this world a better place. We all need a little bit of that right now. Welcome to the Gap Year Podcast, where we explore the who, what, where, when, and why of gap years. It's real people sharing their stories, ideas, and experts diving deep into how you can make the right decisions in order to have a meaningful gap year. This is the place to be no matter where you are on your gap year journey. I'm Michelle Dittmer, your resident gap year expert. Let's jump right in. Hello, everybody out there, and welcome to the Gap Year Podcast. Today, our guest is Kayne Boyall, and he is currently a student at the University of Guelph, but he has a real passion for what's happening to our natural and not so natural environment and what is happening with our climate crisis. So I've invited him here today to share a little bit about what a climate action gap year might look like, and what are some of the things that we should be considering if we're having a gap year, but we want to be climate conscious. So, Kayne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, why don't you give us a little bit of a background on who you are and why you have become, or why you are so passionate about what's happening with climate action and the climate crisis?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I've always kind of had an interest in the welfare of the environment, whether that was from my grandfather, who was a very heavy naturalist when I was younger, or just kind of projects that I was involved with, like in elementary school. It's always kind of been like a central aspect to what I wanted to do, and then that's matured along with my academic career. And then when we moved to Canada, like between grade 9 and 10, I kind of just solidified that and like realized that this would be the perfect way to not only give back to the community that welcomed me so warmly, but to really give back to like the natural environment that has done so much for us. So that it just kind of fitted organically. And the more and more I got involved, the more and more I realized what a dire situation we were finding ourselves in. And yeah, the rest is history.
I think that's incredible that it was seeded so young, and I think it's something that's really important to a lot of young Canadians and a lot of young people around the world, as we're realizing what situation we're currently in and what damage has been done and what is reversible and what is irreversible. So I'm really glad that you were able to move past that kind of stifling, overwhelmed feeling of hopelessness that can sometimes be a little bit paralyzing, and move to a place of action. So I'm wondering, what organizations did you get involved in, or how did you connect with others who had a similar interest?
Yeah, for sure. It was almost comical the way I met some of the organizations I've worked with, like in high school and now in university. So I was good friends with like an upper year student in high school when I first moved to Canada, and he worked for the Halton Environmental Network as like a co-op program, and I got involved with him. He invited me to a volunteer event. I met the executive director there, and like we're now close friends, and like I work with her all the time. And then from there, I kind of got involved with an agency that they're part of, the Halton Climate Collective, and got involved with projects that they're running now. I'm one of the senior youth stakeholders for the Halton Climate Collective, which I'm loving every second of what we're doing there. and it really is like a boots on the ground youth climate action based program that we're running. So it's a ton of fun, and it's surrounding yourself with really passionate, hardworking youth members of the community. So it's always a good time. But we're all super focused on making our community more climate resilient and more sustainable and more progressive. So we all have that common drive. And then I got involved with groups like the Oakville Green Conservation Association and World Wildlife Fund. So those are, just kind of finding organizations that coincided with my interests and my values, and honestly, just opening up a conversation with them. The worst thing they could have done was said no, but hardly any of them did. They're always looking for some sort of collaboration, especially from youth, because they are realizing how important it is for us to get that experience, but for them to just have input from so many different perspectives. So yeah, half the time it was just shooting an email and being like, "Hey, I'm happy to help. What do you have for me?"
There's a couple of things that really popped out for me and what you were saying there. I like that you were able to connect with something that was like hyper local to where you lived, but then it also kind of dovetailed up or scaffolded up into larger national and international organizations as well. And I think some people don't realize that in your local community, there's probably an organization that you can tap into locally that will provide you with really great opportunities and resources and projects that you can make an impact in your own community. And then also scaling up, because this isn't the work that you're doing in your local community isn't going to change everything if the whole world isn't on board as well. So scaling up into larger organizations is really important. And the other thing that you said that I really, really loved was that you just have to put yourself out there. And it can be a little bit intimidating to send that first email, but people are always looking for support from other like-minded people. So if you have a passion, no matter what it is, so whether it is climate action or it is working with little kids or it is our aging population, whatever your passion is or whatever issue you want to change, find that organization and then just make that first call, send that first email, because it's going to open up so many doors to so many different opportunities like you did.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't have put it better myself. It is really just taking that first step, and that is the hardest one to take. But once that ball starts moving, it opens so many doors and so many ones that you don't expect.
And another specific note for people who are on gap years and why things like this are so important is because what you said about making connections and making friends in these new situations. So often when you're on a gap year, a lot of your friends will have headed off in different directions. And so to keep up your social connections as a social being, as a human, being able to find new people that you can hang out with on your gap year, this is a great way to be able to do that and to connect with other people that you can befriend while your other friends are off in lectures with other people. You can create this network of people that I think is really great. And I was wondering if you could touch on one of the things that you said was working with people of different ages and people interested in the youth voice. What's it like to be working with, because sometimes high school students are used to working with their peers, and sometimes when we step into these organizations, it's cross-generational. There's lots of different ages within the group. So I was wondering if you could comment on what that was like.
Definitely. So it is a little intimidating at first in some of the environments you find yourself in, especially when you're dealing with people with like these super high caliber professional experiences, people like that have worked with multinational organizations or have created these like pilot programs to mitigate tons of CO2. Like it's really like a name dropping event that you find yourself in sometimes. But like you just have to remember that like you're bringing your opportunity with you, and that you're someone who can be so easily taught and adapted to whatever situation, especially like at the stage of life that like young adults find themselves in. Like we're very easily groomable to any position we want to put ourselves in. So like if you find that organization that coincides with the passion that you have, or with values that you have, like once you find yourself in that, just know that like there's going to be people around you that have more experience than you, that have different experiences than you, but that's exactly the kind of environment that you want to find yourself in. And like you want to share those experiences with them, and you always do bring something else to the table, right? It might not be those tangible white paper skills, but it might be something softer. It might be a new perspective. It might be the lack of experience that can give you a new and objective view of a situation or something like that. So just because you're younger doesn't mean you're unskilled or underqualified for something. It just means that you're differently qualified for something. And that was a bit of a learning curve that I had, especially stepping into my role as youth stakeholder for the HCC. But like once you realize that, and once you realize that the more you get involved, the more that's going to have a butterfly effect to get other youth involved, and you can kind of collaborate with them, and you can start collaborating at an intergenerational level. It does wonderful things.
I like that you say that you're differently skilled, and youthfulness is an asset. There's wonderful researcher and youth activist Ilona Doherty, who works out of the University of Waterloo, and all of her research is on the value of youth and how youth are actually wired for innovation and creativity. And it's something that society needs to value more, because at this stage in the game, your brain works differently than a fully developed adult brain, and the ability to approach problems with a new perspective and with this creativity and innovation means that problems are going to be solved in a different way and more effective. So it's just adding to the value of what's going on. So thank you for highlighting that. That's really important for young people to hear, that although they may not have life experience in the way that some of these other folks do, your youth is actually an asset that you can contribute to the team.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to circle back to the idea of a gap year. So we had a beautiful example of what a climate action gap year could look like with Greta Thunberg, and she has really put on the map a gap year. She's also really put on the map what young people can do when they stand up and speak out about it. So she's kind of like the gold standard, beyond the gold standard of what you could do on a gap year. So I want to start with some of the simple actions. So maybe you're not a full-fledged activist, but you want to be conscious about your gap year and the ecological and carbon footprint that you're doing, and some of the things that you might be a little bit more conscious of on your gap year. So I was wondering what small actions you might suggest that people who are on a gap year might consider to make their gap year more climate friendly.
Yeah, for sure. And it kind of depends on what kind of gap year you're taking, whether it's like a gap year to like work and earn a bit of an income, or get some like work experience, or if it's to travel, or if it's to volunteer in different nations or something like that. But kind of keeping some core focus points in mind, and definitely looking more at how much and what kind of products you're consuming, because no matter where you go, you're voting, and it's not necessarily within the political system, but you're voting with your currency, right? You're using your money to decide what products are valued and what aren't, and to what extent. So it's always important to keep that in mind, especially when it comes to like air travel, or to like certain products in different parts of the world, or fossil fuels or something like that. And I think as long as students who are taking gap years are keeping a very pragmatic approach to it, then I think like it is a lot more sustainable to do throughout the full gap year, than to like kind of come out with a really idealistic view and then like kind of have that like kind of collapse halfway through. Because I have spoken to a few friends who are currently doing their gap years, and they wanted to live like a carbon neutral lifestyle, but they found themselves like my one friend who visited Europe, like he tried to find a boat going back to North America, but he couldn't, so he had to fly back. And that again was one of the challenges that Greta Thunberg faced was like traveling across continents. But again, with her celebrity status, like she managed to find something there. So I digress, but it's really about keeping that pragmatic view of things and just keeping in mind that your dollar input is one of the greatest ways that you can decide what products like globally and locally are being valued. And then obviously what it gets a bit more specific once you kind of decide what kind of gap year you're taking. So if you're staying at home and working, you might want to look into like like healthy active transportation, or you might want to look into ride sharing or something like that. If you're traveling, you might want to look into like carpooling from destination A to B and stuff like that. So it's kind of more specific to what they want to do, but just keeping in mind like the kind of purchasing power you have in these different places.
I love it. And I think one of the nice things about a gap year is we tend to have a little bit more time to put into the researching side of things. Because often when we are making purchases, it's impulse purchases, or we're strapped for time and we just need to buy something, or we just need to get food, or we just need to order in that sustenance to keep us going. But on a gap year, there's a little bit more time to be thoughtful about the things that we're doing and research the things that we're doing. And so I think that that's important when we're talking about voting with our dollar, or in investing in companies and products and experiences that are more aware of the climate, the impact they're having on the climate. That is a beautiful thing that you could do on your gap years, taking that time to do the research. So if you do need to purchase a new backpack, spend the time and do the research on where those products are being created, what materials are they being made of, what is the company doing in terms of their environmental policies. So having that freedom of time allows you to make better decisions, and once you have done that research, you can then make those decisions for the rest of your life. So I think that's really important to use the time wisely to be able to do that research, so you are a more thoughtful consumer.
For sure.
And I like the idea too of really focusing on ways that your transportation is impacting the climate, and looking at opportunities to be a little bit more thoughtful there. So I think that's another really great reminder of the simple things that we could do, whether you're on a gap year or not. But specifically for those on a gap year, I think that's a really great thing to do. Now, if people wanted to really level up their gap year and they had that activist soul, and they really wanted to kick it into high gear, what could a gap year look like for somebody who wanted to dedicate their entire year to being a little bit more of an activist, or taking on a role in contributing to solving this climate crisis?
For sure. And I think a much more powerful term to use now instead of activist, which is kind of becoming all synonymous with the thoughts and prayers kind of approach, is more a climate champion, who is someone who becomes educated on whatever sphere of the issue that they're interested in, and really just diving deep and like having that boots on the ground approach. And there's so many ways that you can tackle these issues, whether it's mitigating like fossil fuel emissions that are being put into the air or into our waters, or adaptation, so knowing that not all the changes that have occurred can be reversed, and adapting to some of the irreversible things that have happened, or rehabilitation, or knowing that not everything is irreversible and that we can kind of remedy some of the solutions that have happened, whether it's, I know there's some amazing organizations that are looking at coral reef rehabilitation, or revitalizing soil areas, and then sequestration, so pulling some of those carbon emissions from the air and kind of restabilizing some of the microclimates. So really there's so many different ways that you can approach the issues, but every way is equally important. Obviously there's a certain ordinal approach to it, but really, like if you follow like the mitigation or adaptation approach or sequestration, like it's really what you make of it. And like especially at our level, if you really like dive deep into that, you get so much experiential value out of it. It's fantastic, and from that you can make those big lifestyle changes because you're making those larger greenhouse gas impacts that really brings down into like your personal level, into your community, or into your family, and you kind of internalize that very abstract thing, especially to people in first world nations. Climate change affects everyone, but it affects everyone to different extents. So people who find themselves in very fortunate situations might not experience the same crises or same extreme events that some developing nations might find themselves in. So it really does internalize that externality for a lot of people, and that can have a butterfly effect to your greater community, and that can inspire change in people around you, which is so important, because it's not about a few people doing 100 things perfectly. It's about thousands of people doing a few good things, which is very important to keep in mind.
I love that, because I think we can adapt our own behaviors and our own things, and that's just a drop in the pond. But we need everybody to be on board. So the more that you can get your friends and your family and your community on board and work on some of those larger scale, more people involved, educating more people, providing them with tips and tricks and awareness and knowledge, that's where the greatest impact is really going to come.
Definitely. And yeah, you've summed it up perfectly there with getting so many people more involved, and that can lead to such a huge butterfly effect, and it's so much more sustainable for like a large group of people to have a pragmatic approach than a few people having like an absolutist one, and it leads to like community progress rather than individual, which is how the fight against the climate crisis is going to be won.
Beautiful. I love it. One of the things that I sometimes hear from climate champions, thank you for giving me a new term to use here, is that there's sometimes a disconnect between them and their parents or them and their community, that they are very passionate about it and they're getting some resistance or some eye rolls every time that they question why they're using that single-use plastic. So do you have any tips for people to help bridge that disconnect between people who may not have the same views?
Yeah, for sure. And the best experience that I found was bringing my parents along on that journey, and continuing to have them included in some of those conversations or some of the research that I'm doing. So really like just trying to bring it home and make it like a shared gain of experience. So having them along for what I'm being educated in, whether it's in the classroom or more experiential learning, and having them along with projects that I'm collaborating on with peers or at intergenerational level, and having them be a part of some aspect of when I'm taking action and creating initiatives to mitigate carbon emissions or to sequester carbon, or for climate adaptation programs or something like that. So having them part of every step of the journey, so they're more involved with what is my child doing with their life, rather than like something that they're not necessarily involved in. And then through that, it acts as a proxy to get them more involved in issues regarding the climate crisis. So because they're more involved with their child's actions and their child's well-being, they start to become aware of this. Well, if it's important to my child, and if they're putting this amount of effort into it, then maybe I should look into this or something like that. And really just keeping them involved and showing them the positives of what can be done, because while it's important to show people the gravity of the situation, it's also so important to inspire them with not hope, but inspire them to show that it's possible. um, and really show parents like, listen, I'm putting my time into the well-being of my future, into the well-being of my community's future. I'm putting well-being into, because it covers the ethos sense, but it also covers pathos. Like it's very logical to protect the natural resources of the environment if uh, like socioeconomic and environmental economic systems rely upon them, right? So it is a smart decision for youth to get involved um, in the climate crisis. So like if you kind of just change the way the conversation is being held, I think it's really effective in getting parents involved and getting parents behind you when you want to start pursuing um, more overt climate mitigation and adaptation.
I love it. And the analogy that comes to mind as you're talking here is the same way that a hockey parent, a hockey mom or a hockey dad takes you to your hockey practices, and they get up early with you and they celebrate your wins and they
Yeah,
console go so well. You want that same feeling when you are involved in projects like this, and that is a way that you can communicate with your parents and say that it's like, this is a sport, this is my sport, because that's very tangible in our culture. This is what I'm good at, this is my gift and my skill and my talent and my passion. The same way that skating and stick handling and going to practice is important for an athlete or for a hockey player, these things are important to me. And I think that that's a really strong way to help parents realize that they can get on side in the same way, showing up to a hockey game, getting involved in those initiatives and listening to the stories and helping with the research, in the same way you would show up for an athlete.
I couldn't have put it better, and I think I'm definitely gonna borrow that analogy with some of the conversations I have, because that's definitely speaking my language. I come from a very sport heavy culture in South Africa and a very sport heavy family. Whether we were playing rugby or soccer or cricket, or once my brother and I got into like swimming and rowing and fitness, like there's always been some sport in the household. There's always some sports game on the TV. So that's definitely hitting home for me, and that definitely hits home in so many wider families and communities and cultures. So I think that's a perfect analogy, and it's a perfect model to use. Kind of getting invested in what their child is interested in, what they're passionate about, and then that passion is contagious, right? And it spreads to the family, it spreads to and it spreads into a culture, it spreads into a point where you're excited to be more sustainable. It's exciting to be progressive, and it's like, oh, like there's so many culture shifts that have happened already. Like it's cool to be vegetarian now, and it's cool when people use, that reusable straw when they go get Starbucks now, and it's small things, and even though the like the black and white impact of that action might be small in terms of like how many, like the actual numbers of how many tons of CO2 you're mitigating or something like that, but it's that social change that is so much more deep rooted in the like societal transformation that we need to see. So it is a multi-head approach, and that's definitely something that people need to take into equal importance that as just like individual mitigation and adaptation.
I love it. That just gave me goosebumps. I think the fact that you're talking about how exciting it is, like your passion is just coming through so strongly. And that's one of the things that I see in so many gappers. They have a particular passion that just fires them up. And when they connect with the community of people who have a similar passion, things just catch on fire. Like this little spark just gets this kindling thrown on it and gasoline on the fire. And it just explodes into something beautiful. And when the families also join in on that, it can become such a beautiful bonding experience for a family and for a larger community to come together over something that is important. And when we're talking about climate action, these are things that are affecting every single person on this planet, every single living being on this planet. And what better cause to stand behind than to than to support our natural environment and the way that humans are impacting that environment. So if people wanted to learn more, where would you direct them? Where would you send them?
I would send them on the closest laptop they could find, and definitely there's we have the world database at our fingertips now in the information age, and obviously there's a lot of conflicting information, and there's a lot of because the information is so easily accessible, like a lot of people can share their very conflicting opinions sometimes, and it may seem overwhelming, but if you go to the authority websites, so whether it be like places like the NRDC or the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation or the United Nations or something like that, if you really go to those, then they usually have a wide array of research that has been done, and it is very objective in the way that they present that information. So definitely that, but getting in touch with your local NGO and finding out more from them. Again, just opening up the conversation, being like, hey, I want to learn more about this. I want to be more educated on that, which is exactly the character type of a climate champion, of being educated, being collaborative, and being action orientated. So first off, if people are wanting to get educated on this, that is the best and the first step. But definitely just opening that conversation up at both the that gold standard level, like you were talking about, of like places like the United Nations or NRDC or World Wildlife Fund, or the International Panel on Climate Change or something like that. But then also going to your local level of like asking like, hey, how is my community specifically being affected? Because climate crisis related events happening in Oakville, Ontario might be different to Karachi, Pakistan. So it's definitely finding out what's happening globally and then what's happening at your local level as well.
I love it. And you just spat out so many great resources, and we'll link to them in the show notes. So if you miss them, don't worry. We will make sure that you have access to them on the show notes for this episode. Now, before we sign off, is there any other messages you want to send out to folks on a gap year that you would like to share with the listeners?
Well, I think you're doing a fantastic job here in giving them information and a platform to know that they are supported in taking their gap year. But just know that if you are taking that gap year, first of all, fantastic for knowing when you need some you time and you need to grow outside of the classroom environment. But know that if you are doing it and you are interested in climate progressiveness and climate sustainability, anything and everything helps, right? If it's a 1 by an inch or if it's a 1 by a mile, it's still a 1. And whatever you do, just don't stop moving forward, right? Don't stop being the amazing youth who want to come in and want to say enough is enough. We are taking a stand against unsustainable behavior. Don't stop being the youth that said, that like, here's the line, we're taking a stand. Don't stop being the youth that is taking the planet's livelihood seriously.
I think that's such a beautiful message and so heartfelt, and I know that's going to resonate with so many of our young people, and we'll definitely use that soundbite to share far and wide, because that message is so powerful, and the encouragement that some people might need to hear when they're coming up against a problem that's so large, and the impact that they can have will make a difference. And coming from somebody who's living and breathing and walking the talk, I think that will be a really, really powerful thing for folks to hear. So Kayne, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today and sharing so many incredible resources and shedding light on what is possible on a gap year. So I hope this episode really inspired you to get involved and get connected. Now, if you are currently on your gap year and you are looking for that same sense of community, we are opening for a very short period of time, for the last time in 2020, our gap year community, the Gap Year Game Plan. So if that's something you're interested in, if you're looking to get the most out of your year, to connect with other like-minded people, and to have some accountability to make sure you're getting the most out of this year, you need to check that out. So you need to check out our website, and that will connect you with all the information. The link is in the podcast notes, www.cangap.ca/certification. Tons of great resources for you, and we would love to see you as part of that community to make sure you're going to get the most out of this year, and that you're going to be connected with other people who are on a similar journey in a very, very weird year that we're all in. So I hope to be able to support you on that, and would love to see you inside that community.